So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and a very special welcome to all our Tree Council supporters and our volunteer tree wardens. I know a lot of you really enjoyed meeting Jonathan last year, so it's great to see you all again. My name is Sarah Long, and I'm CEO of the Tree Council, and I'm here with my colleagues Louise Bowe, who is the project manager for Close the Gap, the hedgerow project, and Dominic Quinn, who's our policy and comms officer. And of course, the amazing Jonathan Drori, who I will introduce more fully in just a second. For those of you who don't know us so well, the Tree Council is a national charity, and we bring everybody to work together for the love of trees. And this week, we're delighted to be celebrating National Hedgerow Week, the first ever National Hedgerow Week, brought to you by the Tree Council with our 5 charity partners, thanks to funding from the Green Recovery Challenge Fund. The aim is to raise awareness of all the important things that hedges do for us, not only in the countryside, but also in our cities. We want the world to notice hedges. We'd like the nation to benefit from bigger, healthier, better connected hedgerows, and we'd like to share knowledge on how to care for them and the precious wildlife that they support. So thanks to our bid, we not only have National Hedgerow Week, we're also going to plant 53 kilometres, that's 32 miles of new hedgerow, restore existing hedgerow, and plant 2,650 hedgerow trees. And with More Trees Community Nursery down in Devon, we're training 10 apprentices. And with People's Trust for Endangered Species, we're launching a new app to assess the health of hedgerows. There'll also be lots of new information on a knowledge hub on the web, guidance on hedgerow management and so on. So this is the second weekend of National Hedgerow Week. Everyone's been incredibly supportive. BBC TV, The Telegraph, The Times, Gardener's Question Time, and even a piece in the FT this weekend. And the features talk about the wonderful things that hedgerows do for us, capturing carbon, cleaning the air we breathe, soaking up those particulates, providing homes and food for wildlife. And hedgerows are remarkable for their beauty and their biodiversity, but we must remember that they have a huge cultural value too. They've been part of our landscape for more than 7,000 years, since the days of the wildwood. They're a cause for celebration and delight, and they have a lot to teach us about ourselves and about humanity, which is why we're delighted to welcome tonight's guest, the incredibly wise and witty Jonathan Drori, who is a true hedgerow hero. He's the best-selling author of Around the World in 80 Trees, now published in 18 languages, beautifully illustrated by Lucille Clare. And his latest book is also selling like hotcakes, no surprise, Around the World in 80 Plants, which we're going to enjoy hearing about tonight. John is a trustee of the Eden Project and Cambridge Botanic Garden. He has links to the Woodland Trust and Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. He's an honorary professor at Birmingham University's Institute of Forest Research, and his 4 TED Talks have had millions of views. He is truly one of the most talented people that we know. In a previous life at the BBC, he was executive producer of more than 50 primetime science documentaries. And at a personal level, the Tree Council is incredibly grateful to John for his advice when we set out to do our first webinar some 18 months ago, when it was National Tree Week. And what we learned about John then is that in addition to being a cracking good author and raconteur with a huge sense of fun, John is also incredibly generous. In short, he has humanity. So over to you, John, to share your thinking on the higgledy-piggledy happiness, plants and humanity.
Gosh, Sarah, I wish my parents were alive to have heard what you just said, because most of it's probably true, but hearing it all in one go is a bit much. Thank you. I'm going to try and share my screen, and I hope that you'll just stay on my screen long enough for me to know that what you're seeing is okay. And what I'm hoping that you're seeing now, I hope that you're seeing the full screen slide. how brilliant. Okay,
Yeah,
thank
all
you.
good.
I can see you giving a thumbs up. So hello everyone, thanks for having me. I'm sitting in my messy office here in London, all alone and rather lonely, actually, talking to the camera. I plan to talk for about 40 minutes or so, and I'm going to, I hope that there's some discussion after that. And I'm going to share some of the hedgerow plants that I like and that I've seen lately. I spend quite a lot of my time in Dorset, so there'll be some pictures of Dorset hedgerows from this week that I've taken. I hope that each of my little stories has a message, and I hope also that those stories are like chapter in a wider story, which I'll come to at the end. So let's begin. And I have a feeling that I don't need to convince this audience that hedgerows are important or special. But let me start by telling you what I think a hedgerow isn't. And I'm going to see if I can make a laser pointer appear. Does that work, Sarah? Oh, does that laser pointer work?
Yes, it does.
Excellent. So let me start here in Britain with a familiar story. This is the story of two trees. One is called Cupressus nootkitensis from British Columbia, the yellow cedar. And this one, Monterey cypress, and one of those was a weedy but fast grower, and the other one is a slow growing but rather indestructible tree. And someone brought those back to a garden in Wales in the 19th century. It was at Leighton House near Welshpool. What could possibly go wrong? Well, what went wrong, you might gather from if I tell you the name of the person who owned that garden. It's a chap called Leyland. You can see where this is going, perhaps. What went wrong was that those two trees met and hybridized, that is, they sort of had sex, in a garden in Wales. There we go. So the result was Leylandia. And it's the tree, of course, we all love to hate. And the popularity of this tree, I think, says a lot about the British attitude to biodiversity and also privacy. People used it, of course, as a living hedge, not a hedgerow, but a hedge. And by the late 1990s, there were about 18,000 simultaneous neighbour disputes going on that had been, those are the ones that have been registered with local authorities. At least 2 murders as people fought over the right to light versus privacy. Parliament spent 22 hours considering what to do. And eventually it was brought under control using antisocial behaviour orders, or ASBOs, which was the same sort of rule that people used to try and rein in Staffordshire Pit Bull Terriers on housing estates, which is another, depending how you feel about this, another sort of monster hybrid. And one of the things that you get with hybrids is that you sometimes get what's called hybrid vigor. And that's what we have with Leylandii. And because it's only been around since the mid-19th century, we don't know how big and tall Leylandii will grow. Incidentally, the ASBO law was guided through the House of Lords by the magnificently and appropriately named Lady Gardener of Parks, which I just love. Now, thank goodness, most of these trees, these Leylandii trees, they're pretty much sterile, which means that they can only sort of breed from cuttings. But it is hopeless for biodiversity compared with our native species that have evolved in balance with all sorts of little critters. So this is exactly not the kind of hedgerow or hedge we're talking about. So this is more like it. The great British hedgerow developed before the days of barbed wire to pen animals. And the best ones are havens of rustling, bountiful biodiversity. All tingle-tangle and beautiful, plants, insects, fungi, animals, birds. But today I'm going to concentrate on the plant biodiversity because I'm a bit obsessed with plants. Now I realise that I'm coming to you at the end of a brilliant whole week of hedgerows. So you really don't need me banging on about hedgerows being biodiversity hotspots. I expect by now you know all the hedgerow species. The elder, for example, at the top left here, we used to make whistles out of the stems, which have a sort of pith that you can hollow out. You can make quite yummy elderflower cordial, obviously, and also, as I can attest, really not very nice wine that you can make out of the elderberries, or at least it wasn't the way my parents made it. And you'll know hawthorn, and you'll know primroses and campion, And where the light gets in, you'll find beautiful clematis, old man's beard, and so on. Then there are the plants of darker spots. And I love the way that every hedge is completely different depending on the light, the geology, and so on. I love these minuscule fungi that you can see there, and the moss, and so many varieties of moss and beautiful ferns. We'll come back to ferns because they're quite interesting. So on our family holidays, hedgerows were for foraging for things to munch, just as much as looking at the actual plants. And there was something kind of really, I don't know, so special as a child about picking things that you could eat. Wild garlic for sandwiches, the sort of various berries, blackberries and so on. We'd challenge each other as children to see whether we could eat sloes, which are like disgustingly sour, and give you a kind of sore throat afterwards. The grown-ups made sloe gin, which is actually one of the few homemade alcoholic drinks that's actually palatable. And this is hogweed. You might not know that in Eastern Europe, and when you sort of go to the English countryside with Eastern Europeans, they go all sort of misty-eyed about this plant, because this plant is known in Eastern Europe as Borscht. And you might think that Borscht means beetroot or something, but actually, no, this is the authentic Borscht plant. And it makes fantastic soup. Don't go eating it unless you know what you're looking for, because it looks a little like some things which are rather poisonous. So just be a bit careful with that one. Every hedge different, the geology, the microclimate, the mix of species will be different. And of course, they change year to year. And I've noticed that this year in Dorset and in the southwest, we have bluebells in the hedges, way more than any other year I've ever seen. I don't know why that is. I don't know what was going on last year that spread the bluebells around. But if anyone has any theories, I'd love to know. So many of the plants that you find in hedgerows can be used as indicators. And I love the anemone, the wood anemone. I know that this is an indicator of ancient woodland. Someone told me, it's Lucy, who's credited with the picture on the screen there. She only told me a couple of days ago that this only moves very slowly from year to year. So if you see it in a hedge, this wonderful wood anemone, it's likely to be a remnant of something beautifully old and really rather important. Another ancient woodland indicator. This is dog's Mercury. It's poisonous. It has a sort of very definite rotting fish, sort of fetid smell when you crunch it between your fingers. It contains a poison called methylamine or methylamine. And methylamine, you might have heard of in Breaking Bad if you watch that series, because they used that chemical to synthesize methamphetamine or crystal meth. I'm not suggesting that you can get that out of dog's Mercury. I think if you were into that world, you'd probably find easier ways. And cow parsley, which is in full flower at the moment, that you'll see along hedgerows and country lanes. But this is not completely natural, or it's natural on the left and unnatural on the right. When you see cow parsley taking over like this, it's another indicator. It means there's either agricultural runoff or someone's been cutting and pulverizing the verges. The pulverized plants, along with all those pulverized butterflies and pulverized insects, form a kind of nitrogen-rich mulch, which encourages hogweed and cow parsley and nettles, which drown out all the smaller plants. So if you see that kind of thing going on, that's not really a completely sort of healthy thing to see. So let's think about the nettle. It seems so familiar. It's one of those plants that is wind pollinated, and therefore in the flowers you'll see that there's no need for it to have gaudy flowers, because it's not trying to attract insects to pollinate it. It doesn't need to be showy. And there are female and male flowers, and on so female and male plants with different flowers on each. And on a sunny morning, if you look at these male flowers very carefully, you see little tiny puffs of pollen. It's amazing how they manage to sort of squirt them out. Now, this is a plant that can look after itself. Those tiny hairs that you can see have evolved to discourage herbivores. They, the mouth parts and noses of passing cows and things are sensitive, and just like us, they don't like nettles. And there's a sort of cocktail inside the hollow hairs. You can see at the very end, you can perhaps see this little tiny bobble at the top that breaks off, and then this thing squirts. It's under slight pressure. Squirts a mixture of chemicals, including histamine. So you've heard of antihistamine. Well, histamine is the opposite. So you come out with nasty wheals and things. The neat thing is, of course, that butterflies and butterfly larvae use these hairs as a place to shelter. So, while nettles might look a bit, like dull or something, actually they're quite an important habitat. I'm going to read a little of the nettle. I'm just just about a minute and a half or so, if I may. So this is from Around the World in 80 Plants, which is the more recent one. Nettles accompany us in life and in death, offering clues to our history. They thrive especially well on phosphate-rich soil, colonizing the fertilizer-fed margins of crop fields and following the phosphates that we ourselves accrete in the ash from our fires, in our waste, and in our bones. The banks of castle moats are still cloaked in nettles, feeding on the persistent minerals from sewage and refuse flung there hundreds of years ago. Given the chance, they thrive in churchyards. They spring up at the sites of ancient settlements, outcompeting other plants where the soil chemistry bears the imprint of human habitation. And they have even revealed to forensic investigators the location of buried bodies. Roman soldiers, unfortunate enough to be posted to the northernmost edge of their empire at Hadrian's Wall, attempted to alleviate their rheumatism, the seeping cold, and perhaps even their boredom, by urtication, flagellating themselves with nettles. It's true that in the right frame of mind, the recurrent fiery tingle is not wholly unpleasant, but it's a special kind of person who experiences the sensation as an aphrodisiac. Those people do exist, and urtication is practiced nowadays by those who prefer a little pain with their pleasure. Discomfort and enjoyment do seem to converge in the English relationship with nettles. 18th century pranksters invited garden visitors to describe the bouquet of some newfound herb. It was really a variety of stinging nettle, evidently less well known in those days, and after watching the victim push his nose in, then grimace in pain, oh, those Georgians, how they laughed. And there's still an annual nettle eating championship in Dorset, southwestern England, where any sensible contestant, is there such a person, knows to roll the leaves before consumption, disarming at least some of the trichomes, that's those little hairs. Cooking, however, destroys the sting completely, and the young spring tops of nettles make an inoffensive soup, albeit one with a curiously rough mouthfeel. Although a little grassy, they beat spinach for nutrition and win hands down for smugness on the part of the forager. There is something peculiarly British about the stinging nettle, partly for its potential for eccentricity and comedy, but also for its restrained yet welcome contribution of just a little mild peril to England's innocuous, green and pleasant land. And I chose the nettle to represent England in the plant book. Now, while we're thinking about leaves, I'm afraid it's time for us to have that difficult chat about photosynthesis. So the stuff that plants are made of does not primarily come out of the ground. That's a common misconception, actually held by most people. Have you ever noticed, though, that a pot plant gets bigger and bigger without you having to top up the soil? In fact, the lion's share of the weight of a plant comes from just two ingredients: carbon dioxide from the air, which is absorbed through the leaves and is heavy stuff, and water through the roots. That is the miracle of photosynthesis. Now, water doesn't just carry dissolved goodness around the plant and keep it pumped up and sort of turgid, but it's also part of the chemical reaction. So plants pull up water from their roots. And here's a water-loving plant that you might not associate with hedgerows, but here's the photo evidence. I'm talking about Equisetum, sometimes called mare's tail or horsetail in North America. And it's a plant with a message to us. It's very abrasive. It contains silicates, sand effectively, which are used for furniture in Japan and for sculpting clarinet reeds. In traditional Native American medicine, it's been used to treat urinary tract infections, and it's found all over the Northern Hemisphere. It's a very, very primitive plant, so much so that 360 million years ago, its big brothers, which were called calamites, which I keep thinking of calamities, but calamites, were massive trees, about 50 meters high, 160, 170 feet high. And they didn't rot. And quite probably, and this is a matter of some scientific debate at the moment, quite probably they didn't rot because fungi and bacteria hadn't yet evolved to break down lignin, which is the woody stuff that photosynthesis creates. So they took another 60 million years or so to work out how to break down lignin. And during that 60 million year period, which we called the Carboniferous period, all of the world's coal was formed in that period. So from a climate change point of view, it's obviously best to leave that coal where it is rather than releasing millions of years worth of carbon dioxide by burning it. Nowadays, dead wood does rot. And when it does, carbon dioxide goes back into the atmosphere. So building lots of wooden frame buildings is a very good idea, as long as it's made out of sustainable wood. And so is, hint, hint, buying books, which are made out of wood, of course. And sequestering carbon is the way to go. So having got their food, and the food is absolutely primarily carbon dioxide and water, that makes up the whole sort of majority of the weight of plants, with a few other sort of trace nutrients. Having got their food, plants need to defend themselves. And I already mentioned dogs, Mercury, and nettles, which have their defenses, and that mare's tail with silicates to deter munching herbivores. But there's quite a few hedgerow plants like the sloe, the blackthorn for sloe gin, that have evolved spines, or the poisons in this lovely, lovely spindle tree. The fruit here actually contain, this is quite a common hedgerow plant in certain parts of the country. Fruit contains caffeine, which is there partly as a herbicide, as a sort of pesticide, but partly also to discourage other plants from interfering and sort of competing with it. But this plant, don't have it as coffee, because this contains some other poisons, which are really, really quite strong poisons. So don't have them. A lot of seeds have contain poisons because animals sort of effectively don't really want plants don't really want animals to eat them. This dog rose, you can see the spines here on it rose, is well defended. But when a little wasp lays its eggs, the plant sometimes completely overreacts and creates what's called a gall. This one has the delightful name of Robin's pincushion, which is my main reason for showing it, as well as it's rather beautiful. But we'll hear more about galls a bit later. Now, here's the wild hop plant. It comes from the word hoppen, to climb, Old English, but I love its Latin name, Humulus Lupulus. Lupulus, a little wolf that runs rampant across the hedgerows and scrambles up other plants. And its defenses include very, very powerful bactericides, that is, chemicals that kill bacteria. Very useful to protect the plant, but very handy for us as an addition to ale as a preservative. And in the sort of 14th, 15th century, when it started to be added to ale in Britain, people complained about this sort of nasty foreign thing that was being brought in, and all these preservatives that were being brought in that people didn't like. It's got a rather bitter taste, and those who drink IPA are getting that sort of extra hop bitterness. And I noticed now that beers are sort of competing with each other for extra bitterness. It's a funny old thing that this is a sort of craze at the moment. There are some extremely bitter beers with masses and masses of hops that have been bred especially for this bitterness. At least you're not going to get bacterial attack in the beer. And in a hedgerow, though, it adds a lot of variety and a lot of refuges for insects and birds. And here's garlic mustard, one of the oldest herbs that we know of, that's described, used, this is the one on the left, used in 4000 BC in what is now Germany and Denmark. And you might think, well, how do we know it was being used in 4000 BC? And the evidence comes from phytoliths, which are tiny little grains of silica. Do you remember those I mentioned in the mare's tail? But different plants have different shapes of phytoliths. And so people could tell, looking under electron microscopes, that actually these plants were being used by the Beaker people, as they were called, 4000 BC in Germany and Denmark. It deters this sort of mustard garlic kind of smell, and the chemicals deter some herbivores, but it's absolutely loved by various weevils and midges and butterflies and so on, and dozens of insects and loads of fungi that live together with it. And here's greater stitchwort, supposedly a cure for a stitch in one's side after running. But here's the thing, each one of the plants I've mentioned has its own little ecosystem of fungi and insects that all depend on each other in very, very complicated webs of life. And within this busy community, each plant, just like each little insect or animal, needs to ensure that there's a next generation. So one way that plants ensure the next generation, to ensure that they have baby plants, is by flowering. So flowering plants make pollen, which contains male sex cells that generally need to get to the female parts of another flower of the same species. So one way is to use the wind. And here's hazel. This is alder, I think. Alder you find where hedges cross streams. Alder really loves sort of water. And basically, like the nettle, this sort of lack of gaudy flowers is the clue that this is a wind-pollinated plant. And using wind, you can imagine you just have to throw out masses and masses of pollen everywhere and just hope that it lands in the right place. And that is extraordinarily inefficient. But on the other hand, you don't have to give anything in return. Here's willow pollen under an electron microscope. These pictures were taken at Kew. You can see that these wind-pollinated plants have pollen that is sort of smooth and carries in the air very well. So there's hazel that you find in hedgerows very commonly, and sycamore. The pollen itself, very, very cool. The flowers of wind-pollinated plants, possibly less so. So rather than sending pollen to the breeze, hoping that your pollen randomly gets to the right spot on another flower, you might, of course, think that there's a better way. And if you think flowers are pretty, a flower's purpose is to look attractive. This foxglove is warm and welcoming for bumblebees, with just the right patterning to be particularly attractive. And in return for some sweet nutrient-packed nectar, the bees, get covered in pollen and go straight to the female parts of another flower, and the pollen is transferred exactly where it needs to go. Of course, the flower has to do all this expensive, in terms of resources, stuff in return. It has to you put a lot of effort into making these beautiful flowers, dyes in the flower, pigments and so on that require a lot of energy to produce, and of course putting a load of sugar in the nectar is a very energy intensive thing to do. So that's why the two different methods here that plants use. Here is Aram Maculatum, or cuckoo pint, or lords and ladies. I took this picture last year in Dorset. Now this little chap in the middle, this is called the spadix. It heats up, and it heats up to about by up to sort of 12 or 15 degrees C. It actually, there's some chemical reactions going on there, which evaporate lots of chemicals, volatile chemicals that attract little flies, little insects. And if you uproot one of these and cut it open, the flies are sort of enticed in down here, and then they get trapped for a while. This thing sort of tends to sort of close up, they gorge on all this very, very sticky nectar and get absolutely covered in pollen before being released. And I love the fact that there's all these sort of hidden layers of life going on in a hedge. I've noticed that this year the hedges are full of Aram Maculatum, this plant. And here are the berries that follow. Don't eat them. The plant has evolved protection against any old herbivore that might fancy a snack. Its precious seeds inside the fruit are rather poisonous, but birds like them. And birds particularly go for red colours, red and black kind of berries. And they disperse the seeds with a little bit of fertilizer. Surprisingly, the roots of this rather poisonous plant were ground up for their starch and sold in parts of Dorset as something called Portland sago, which was used for starching shirts and also for thickening milk puddings. So I think that the roots are probably okay to boil up into puddings, but please don't try that. At least not without an on-hand paramedic. Now, this is one you're not going to see in a British hedgerow, but while I'm here, I wanted to tell you about it. It's a kind of Philodendron. It's the big brother of the lords and ladies that I just showed you. And you can see that this structure is very, very similar. It's an Aram family. And this thing flowers for 2 days in Brazil. And what's special about it, it does the same thing as the Aram Maculatum, right? It lives in exactly the same way. This is an inflorescence full of tiny little flowers. And the whole thing heats up. But this thing, which is about sort of 2.5 to 3 feet high, this thing is the only plant I know of that metabolizes fat like a mammal, not starch like a plant does. And this thing, when it's flowering, will produce twice as much energy per gram as a hummingbird. Right now, if you think about how fast a hummingbird is metabolizing, that is amazing. And the whole inflorescence probably uses as much energy as a cat or a fox. That is an extraordinary thing in the plant world. And it can maintain, it does the same thing as Aram Maculatum, it does the same thing as cuckoo pine. It maintains a steady temperature, get this, 44 degrees Celsius, that's 115 degrees Fahrenheit. And it'll maintain that temperature, whatever the outside temperature is doing, even if it goes down to sort of just 10 degrees, it'll maintain that temperature homeostatically. Now, why does it do this? It does the same thing as cuckoo pine. It attracts beetles in. The beetles, come in for the shelter and the warmth. They make fabulous beetle love all night and fly away in the morning, spreading the pollen, having spent the night in the warmth. And I love the fact that cuckoo pine of the little English hedgerow has a relative that's so huge and incredible. But I also like that the huge, incredible one reminds me of how special our cuckoo pine in the English hedgerow is. And plants, like humans, are members of a wider community. And, always remember that. So ferns, they don't do the insect and pollen thing, right? They have another kind of reproduction. And on the back of fern leaves, you'll see structures which are either little dots on this sort of fern or little strips on this sort of fern. And structures are called sporangia, and that's where the spores are. And spores are, the beginning of the next generation of ferns. But if you plant a spore, you don't get another fern. This is the weird thing. So what happens is these tiny spores that you can't see come out of these structures, and they get, distributed in the wind. And they become, if they land somewhere wet, they become the fern's secret other life stage. So the ferns that you know and love, they have this completely other life stage, and it's called a Prothalis. It's a sort of insignificant heart-shaped thing about the size of my fingernail, right? And on the damp underside, it produces microscopic sex organs, a few millimeters apart. The male sex organs produce, would you believe, microscopic sperm. and they have beating hairs that enable them to swim on over to the female sex cells, and together they grow into a fern. So there's this other stage that then grows into a fern, and that's why ferns like dark, moist places, so their sperm can swim in a film of water. Let me read you a little bit about the fern. So this is actually a section from the silver tree fern in New Zealand, but there's a little British story within it. The moist British Isles are also well populated with ferns, and in the 1840s, Victorian England became engulfed in fern mania, an obsession that lasted half a century. Ferns appealed to Victorian sensibilities on many levels. There's something restrained and comfortably ordered about them. The shape of the leaflets often repeats that of the fronds themselves, and ferns' reproductive methods are subtle and modest, with none of the brash sexuality of flowers and their need for birds and bees. Handily, ferns could flourish in the shadows of mass housing in industrial cities, yet they were marketed aspirationally as plants especially suitable for those of superior intelligence and discernment. Collecting ferns became a national hobby, wholesome and healthy. Hoping to rouse her from apathy, Charles Dickens encouraged his daughter to tend a fernery. Fern hunting parties became popular social outings where men and women could mix, supported by assistants with picnic hampers. Fern books and societies proliferated, and so did fern paraphernalia. Glass cases for growing and equipment for pressing and storing them. Professionals scoured the countryside rapaciously for rare ferns and hawked them door to door, driving some species to extinction, while the desire for novelty turned attention to ferns from the empire, which is, of course, another story. So having in sort of flowering plants, the ones that have seeds and so on, once you've made your seed, your fruit, you need to spread that seed so as not to compete with the parent tree and or parent plant. And blackberries, which show up very well to birds with which see very well at the sort of red end of the spectrum, and these blackberries actually have a lot of red in them. They show up very well against autumn colours. The yew berries, which are a bright red, you know, neither of these needs a sort of fragrance or anything to particularly attract birds. They just spot them, and these pine nuts are actually a great food for birds as well, which again show up in bird vision very strongly. And if you've ever wondered why so many fruits are laxative, the reason is that the digestive tracts of animals like us are rather sort of unpleasant places for seeds to be. On the one hand, they need something to come along and eat them, not to chomp them up, not, you know, make them unviable, but then to sort of have them go through the digestive tract and get pooed out somewhere else, but not stay too long. So most fruits that we eat are laxative for that reason. And of course, they get pooed out with a little bit of fertilizer as well. So some plants spread their seed by using animals, manipulating animals to do so. So hazels, for example, and oaks and beeches, they all have trees. They're all trees that need to get their seeds buried, and in other words, planted. And you can imagine that you know, squirrels don't have absolutely sort of perfect memory, so they sort of bury these seeds to sort of come back to later, and then they forget where they were. And that, of course, is brilliant for the tree. So not only has it got it dispersed, but also planted underground. Very, very clever. But there's another trick that they have, and that is that you might have heard of mast years. So if you imagine a roughly constant number of trees producing a roughly constant number of acorns or hazelnuts or beech mast that will support a roughly constant population of squirrels and other things that will eat them, sort of burying some and forgetting a few. It goes on like that for a few years, and then all of a sudden the trees do this amazing thing, and they coordinate this across a whole area, sometimes a huge swathe of a country. And what they do is that they build themselves up, putting on extra foliage, and then in the autumn they absolutely go for it and make a huge extra amount of nuts, or mast as it's called. And you get that with beeches, oaks, hazels, and it's called a mast year. And what happens is that there's, because the population has been stable up until that point of the things that eat them, the squirrels or other mammals or rodents, it means that there's sort of more mast all of a sudden than that stable population can actually eat, which means there's more of them get to grow into baby trees. And I think there's a sort of moral here, which is that sometimes you can get more of what you want in life by being super generous. Now, I absolutely love beeches, and the odd beech in a hedgerow. This, by the way, is one of the drawings by Lucille Clerc from Around the World in 80 Trees. But the odd beech in a hedgerow reminds me of the beautiful silence of a beech forest. And I'd like to read you a little piece about the beech, if I may. Statuesque and resolute, beeches are common throughout Central and Western Europe. The leaves, which have a distinctively undulating edge, are silken-haired and lime green when new, darkening as they mature. Successive layers of leaves overlap. The resulting gloom deters less shade-tolerant species from growing and makes beech forests, which lack shrubs close to the ground, strangely quiet. In autumn, the beech nuts, or mast, support many animals, and in hard times, people too. The scientific name, fagus, is derived from the Greek stem for eating. The beech has a smooth complexion, even in old age. When other tree species, such as oak, grow in girth, their new bark forms a layer underneath the old. Unable to expand, the old bark cracks and forms deep ridges. Beech bark, however, can expand sideways to accommodate growth and stays even by continuously shedding its top layer in minuscule fragments. I chose the beech to represent Germany. In Germany, lightning, they say, never strikes a beech tree. And actually, there's a sort of funny element of truth in this. Lightning strikes beech trees just as much as every other tree, it turns out. But beech trees survive. And the reason they survive is, well, what's happening in a lightning storm? It's raining, right? And so the outside of the tree will be wet. But those craggy trees will have dry patches, which means the electricity can't flow down so well along the outside of the tree. And in an oak, it gets diverted down the middle of the tree and blows the tree asunder, the electricity from the lightning. Whereas in a beech tree, the film of water and the continuous film of water on a smooth bark acts like a lightning conductor and protects the tree. Fantastic. Now, I like the beech tree for two reasons. The first is that it's associated with writing, and that seems to be what I'm doing at the moment. In every European language, beech and book are similar words. Buch and Bücher in German. A book, after all, at one time was vellum pages held together by beech boards. In German, the word for letters of the alphabet are Buchstaben, literally the marks stabbed or carved into beech. Rembrandt used beech galls, remember those galls, for making ink. Medieval writing desks were beech wood. The first experiments with movable type were made out of beech wood. Beech, 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 writing, writing, writing. And of course, the smoothness lends itself to being used as a medium in itself. That smooth bark writing, has been a writing surface for love messages. And graffiti on trees, which I don't really like, was also abhorred by Virgil. And yet Virgil, get this, Virgil complained about it bitterly and then did it himself, hypocrite. And maybe that's the moral of the beech tree. We know about climate change, but we're not denying it. And yet we would all still jump on a long haul flight if we could. We're all Virgil in our way. Hedgerows are brimming with biodiversity in landscapes that are, for many species, absolutely sort of green deserts. They provide corridors for movement of insects and animals and joy, I think, to us. A countryside in balance needs fewer agricultural pesticides, not more, and hedges reduce water evaporation in the fields that they surround. Birds eat and disperse the seeds of the plants, the flowers of those plants, feed on insects that pollinate the plants, which in turn make food for other insects. The insects are food for birds, and so on and so on. Everything depends on everything else. So break any one of those chains and a whole lot of things die. The world is poorer as a result. And it's not just poorer, but less stable. I often think of the analogy with Jenga, you know, that parlor game. It looks stable enough when you build a tower, but each bit you take out lowers the resilience, makes the whole lot more vulnerable. And so it is with every little critter, every little fungus, every little thing that you sort of take out of a hedgerow or an ecosystem. It makes the whole lot more vulnerable. So I want us to stop this fixation with the neat and tidy. I do understand that for an older generation, they've been brought up needing to keep nature at bay. And my grandmother felt that very strongly and wanted to sort of mow everything and arrange everything. My parents less so, and me definitely less so. People say they want wildlife, and yet they don't seem to want the wildlife to eat anything. Wildlife needs insects. Insects need to eat. Stop mowing the verges, or if you have to, mow the absolute minimum. Rejoice in the slightly unkempt. Don't plant hedges with only one species in them. Redefine the best kept villages. Stop celebrating sterility. And I'd like it if people would take pleasure in juxtapositions, to enjoy the imperfections of nature, or as the Japanese would have it, wabi-sabi. Draw comfort from the sort of ambiguous and non-hierarchical. In our busy lives, decluttering is all the rage. You know, I sort of find it in every newspaper, sort of colour magazine. It's all about decluttering. But I urge you to resist that search for purity. Just as the hedgerow is valuable for its many relationships, in life it's the juxtapositions between things that inspire ideas and often give us pleasure. And that, of course, means that you should, you know where I'm going, don't you? That, of course, means you should celebrate and revel in human diversity. Human beings are one species, remember. And, you know, the physically and mentally, human diversity is good for us. Variety is indeed the spice of life. So I wonder if hedges mightn't be a bellwether for the health of a society. Good societies can plan far ahead, embrace ambiguity, tolerate higgledy-piggledy-ness. Good societies value and actually take pleasure in biodiversity and nature. Good societies reject the thrall of vast monocultures, whether they be plants or humans, and instead they accept and reap the rewards of a lack of uniformity in ecosystems, in agriculture, and in human communities. So after food, defense, reproduction, dispersal, what else do hedgerow plants need? Love. Of course they need love. Hedgerows need protection. They need renewal and they need a stable climate. And in the end, that means gutsy leaders who are going to understand and have the charisma to persuade populations about the things we all, in our heart of hearts, know that will have to be done. We need to protect forests, peatlands, biodiverse, carbon-grabbing spots like hedgerows. They need to stop giving licenses, and would you believe subsidies, to oil and gas drilling and coal mining. They need to impose carbon taxes and announce in detail how and when they'll be ratcheted up, and work out urgently how we can live happy, fulfilled, not hair-shirted lives without consuming ever more and more. Now, I emphasize this is absolutely not about party politics. I think successive governments of every colour have been just as bad or just as good as each other. But I want governments to act on the basis of conscience and science with a moral and environmental compass. And that's why I'm particularly pleased that DEFRA, I notice, are one of the sponsors of Hedgerow Week. Good on you. Thank you. Now, let me finish with a short poem written in the 1870s, I think. It's by Gerard Manley Hopkins. And I like to think of this poem as a celebration of serendipity and exuberant, unregimented, ununiform life. It's called Pied Beauty. And I'll just read you read you this, which I now have to find on my screen, if you excuse me for a second. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple colour as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire coal, chestnut falls, finches' wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow and plough, and all trades, their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle dim, he fathers forth, whose beauty is past change. Praise him. Now, I think we might now say praise her as well. And some people might interpret this poem as religious, and I don't intend it that way. I see it as a celebration of humans and nature in harmony. And remember, the landscape was plotted and pieced, not with wire fences, but living, breathing, jostling, juicy, messy hedgerows. Thank you for coming on my little botanical journey. I've been surprised and delighted by the reaction of people to Around the World in 80 Trees and its new sibling, Around the World in 80 Plants. Any of my proceeds go to various environmental charities, so I feel unabashed in plugging them. And if you want to get in touch, my details are there on the screen. Thank you. Shall we have some discussion now?
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. That was wonderful. That was a really dappled and freckled tour. So thank you so much. And we have got some questions coming in. There's a couple.
Thank you. Sorry if I went on a bit too long, by the way. It's terribly difficult to judge time when you're just talking to a
You can never
camera.
go on for too long. It's fascinating as always, and I'm sure that for everyone in the audience, you know, we always learn huge amounts of things. But two people you mentioned, you know, that how you can have a bottom of a hedgerow which has too much nutrients, and a couple of people are asking, you know, how do you resolve the cow parsley? How do you remove some of these things to reduce nutrients? Somebody else has said, you know, what can we do to rebalance hedgerows? And I guess it's yeah, down to
okay, so good question. I'm not the greatest expert on this, but in true politician style, I'll answer anyway. You know, the earth does sort of eventually recover. So if you have agricultural runoff, then, you know, after a while, things will go back into balance as long as you're not continuing to put nitrates and phosphates into the soil. And, you know, the problem with those chemicals is that they enable certain kinds of plants to outcompete all the other plants, which they wouldn't normally be able to do. So cow parsley and hogweed are examples, and nettles as well. There are people who've tried cutting the plants and sort of removing them at particular times, and with cow parsley it's kind of I think it's just as they're beginning to flower. I think, you know, the best thing is actually just to sort of stop the chemicals kind of leaking onto those bits of the fields, which you know, you can do by sort of leaving a swathe of unfertilized land, you know, as a buffer zone near the hedge. And I think farmers are being encouraged to do that. Actually, if you look around the countryside, there are places where that's happening, and other people have sort of experimented with a shallow ditch, several meters away from the hedge. But the main thing is that it will gradually recover if you just sort of let it be for a while.
Fantastic. And that sort of linked to that, how do we persuade local authorities not to mow so regularly? The first lockdown produced fantastic verges, says Brian, through lack of mowing and weed killing. So how do we persuade local authorities to be a bit untidy?
Yeah, I think there's sort of this is kind of you know, consumer or citizen activism, isn't it? What I would tend to do is make sure that the messages that people are hearing are not all negative all the time, you know, because if I'm a teenager and someone's telling me not to do something constantly, I kind of tend to rebel against it and feel a bit ill towards the people who are telling me this. So where local authorities are doing good, and there are some who are doing great stuff with not mowing verges and so on, give them lots of credit for it. you know, amplify what they're doing and, you know, take to social media and all the other things, write to the newspapers saying, that is fantastic, this is just gorgeous, and that's absolutely great that my local authority is doing this, and I'm so pleased. Do everything you can to make it not political. You know, politics forces people into sort of tribes, and they kind of react against or for things which they might not otherwise. So, you know, give as much credit as you can, and then find allies. So, you know, find the individual councillors, find the individual members of parliament and so on. And when you're sort of communicating with them, you sort of write to people, or you know, create petitions, or you know, get the local school to do projects which then get publicity and so on. You know, just even though you might sort of disapprove of them because they're not the people you voted for, you know, that give them the benefit of the doubt and be polite when you get in contact. And these are all sort of good ways of helping, I think. Sarah, you probably have some thoughts as well, or Louise.
It's interesting. There's a slightly more kind of local question as well here. How might we persuade friends and relatives of the merits of natural untidiness without sounding critical of their immaculate gardens? We have a wildish garden, but we're just seen as eccentric. And I know that Louise has been doing No Mow May and creating a wildflower meadow as a lawn. Do you want to just talk about the reaction of people around you, Louise, to that?
Yeah. So we've got we just live in a regular house on an estate, and our front lawn is either looking really interesting with wildflowers emerging, or looking like a complete overgrown weedy mess, depending on your opinion. And I have neighbours who are both, some neighbours are admiring it, especially now that the flowers are coming out, and say, wow, your garden's looking really amazing. Others who are cursing us because we're, you know, letting all these weeds flourish that are going to spread onto their lawns as well. And I'm just waiting for the flowers to come out a little bit more. The oxeye daisies are just on the edge of coming out, and then we're actually going to put a little sign up on our lawn, because where we live we get lots of people walking past, and to actually explain that this is it's an intentional thing and it's our wildflower meadow. So we are trying, and I talk to some of my neighbours, and I'm, you know, in my little patch, and I put stuff on social media in the town where I live to try and raise awareness. And it is definitely growing. I think No Mow May that has happened this year with Plant Life, on social media, you're definitely seeing people becoming more aware, but it is a gradual thing. It's a gradual thing. But if we all do it, you know, we all write to our local councillors, again, whatever persuasion they are politically, and just gradually, that the change is, it does feel like the change is coming. But we all
I think also we could encourage, for example, the CPRE, the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England, to, you know, I mentioned these sort of best kept village kind of, you know, competitions and so on, which people take quite seriously. You know, no best kept village should have all its verges, you know, manicured and all of that. There should be, you know, we want to make sure there are big prizes for villages that you know, and that we celebrate villages that have biodiversity. I think also we should understand that, you know, why it is that people sort of do that which we think is bonkers, in other words, sort of mowing everything and making it all sort of tidy. I think it's important to try and, you know, understand why people are doing that, because they're not, you know, they're not sort of horrid, nasty people that are just sort of doing it to spite us. There's a reason why people do these things, and it's partly because that's what their parents did, and that's what their parents' parents did, and partly because, and those generations did these things because, you know, at some point in our history we needed to keep nature at bay. You know, so
well, I mean, farmers, we've done some research with farmers, People Trust for Endangered Species and so on, and in the farming world, you know, they're judged or by their peers on how tidy their hedges are, and in fact not really actually knowing that they are better untidy. We were slightly tongue-in-cheek at one point saying we should have a campaign, Keep Britain Untidy,
Yeah, I mean, the National Farmers Union could help, except, you know, they're of course quite sort of, you know, with a small c, they're a very conservative organisation, and they're very sort of, you know, they're not going to be the first people to say, whoa, let's do something differently, you know. And of course, you know, we're also sort of, you know, for some people, there's a very strong financial incentive in people having very, very manicured lawns, because they require a lot of chemicals to put on. So those companies have a financial interest in marketing their wares, and that sort of unfortunately percolates into society because their advertising is very effective.
Just a thing on mentioning the NFU. The NFU actually at the moment, they've been brilliant in terms of Hedgerow Week and hedgerows generally, because they are really pushing the carbon agenda now. And they've
fantastic. So I'm very happy to be.
They've been brilliant actually with them in terms of they've done lots of research on carbon and the whole. So they've actually been really strong advocates of what we've been saying about hedgerows.
Well, Louise, I'm really glad you said that, and I'm very happy to be wrong on that aspect of the NFU. So I take it back. And
no, it's okay. It's
one of those things I'm very happy to be wrong about.
Can I just come back to the book? Your wonderful book for a second. I'm going to hold it up again because it is such, I'm going to go up the screen. It is such a beautiful, fantastic book. And I wanted to ask you, you know, when you have the whole world as your canvas, how do you decide what goes in the book and what do you do with the offcuts?
Oh, it's so difficult. You know, I've always tried to, with both books, I've tried to sort of pick, first of all, there needs to be a geographic spread. Then there needs to be a botanical spread. You know, there need to be some trees, some other kinds of plants, some desert things, some, you know, different, you know, biomes that are represented around the world. But also, you know, the plants have these sort of very interesting relationships with people. And so I'm looking for stories where there's an interesting kind of cultural story as well as an interesting botanical one. And I hope that in each of the stories that I've tried to tell, each book is sort of 80 biographies, if you like, of different species. I've tried to make sure that whether people are sort of knowledgeable about gardening or botany or history or culture or folklore, that there'll be something in that, even if they're kind of relatively expert, that makes them go, gosh, that's a surprise. You know, so when I chose nutmeg for you know, for Indonesia, you know, we all know about the nutmeg wars, but fewer people know that Malcolm X tried to get high on nutmeg in prison in America, and then sort of nutmeg got banned in the American prison system as a result. You know, so you know, I'm always looking for the sort of other angles.
So one Harriet. Oh no, Sarah Mallet has suggested perhaps your next book could be around the British hedgerow in 80 plants.
Do you know, I would love to. And I sort of, I actually, you know, partly because of my own sort of upbringing, which has been, you know, child of immigrants kind of thing, I sort of see things a bit globally. I did wonder about hedgerows in different countries, because you know, if you go to various if you go to Madagascar, for example, then people have hedges there. They don't have the same species that we've got. In fact, 80% of the species in Madagascar are ones that you won't find anywhere else in the world. But they have living hedges made out of these incredible spiny plants, which are not cacti. They've just grown up separately on an island that hived off from Africa 95 million years ago, or whatever it was. And there's this fantastic example of convergent evolution, so that cacti have evolved to sort of protect themselves and conserve water, and so have these plants. They're this, you know, they grow in forests of just sort of spiny things. And they, at first sight, they look like cacti, but they're not. And people plant them as living hedges. In the same way that in Mexico you find living hedges of prickly pears and other species as well that sort of grow in there. So I think maybe you know, I like doing sort of global books, because you've got more markets to sell the books in, but it's all in good causes. So
definitely the seed of an idea there then. That'd be great. Sadly, we have come to the kind of the end of our time together, but you have sent us on a fantastic scientific and historical and story-full journey, and we're incredibly grateful for that. And I know that everybody who hasn't already been out to get your second book, Around the World in 80 Plants, will certainly be going and doing that immediately after this. And as Jonathan said, it's to benefit some fantastic causes. So it makes a great present, it really does. And I ended up keeping it for myself and then also buying the presents for other people. So thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to our awesome audience as well.
I'm going to interrupt because I know we're getting towards the end of Hedgerow Week, and I bet that you guys have had hardly any thanks. So I just, on behalf of the nation, I'm suddenly taking it upon myself to be Prime Minister for a moment. Can I just say thank you. Thank you to Sarah, thank you to Louise, thank you to Dominic, who's behind the scenes making all this work, and all the rest of your fantastic, Tree Council Hedgerow Week team. Just fabulous, and so grateful.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. Thanks very much. Oh, this is the last Hedge Talk in the series on the last day of the first ever National Hedgerow Week. You will be able to pick, if you didn't manage to hear all of Jonathan's talk today or some of the others, they have been recorded, so you'll be able to go and find the links and do that another time. Please go and talk to the hedge, which is what National Hedgerow Week has been all about, and do social media, because we have some really delicious prizes, things like sapling vodka and beautiful hedgerow candles and so on. So you never know, you might win a spot prize if you take part on social media. And finally, if you'd like to pledge a hedge, if you don't have a garden where you can plant your own hedge, or a school where you could perhaps put one along a railing, and you'd like to pledge a hedge, if you go to our website, nationalhedgerowweek.org.uk, then you can pledge for yourself a metre or for your family and so on. And if we all plant 3 metres, every single person in the UK, then we'd actually meet government's target of 200,000 kilometres of new hedgerows. So food for thought there. So thank you again to the amazing Jonathan Drori for a really, really fascinating session. And thank you to Dom and Louise, and thank you to the audience, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks so much, and we'll say goodbye.